We like to believe that the world is a series of solid lines. We trust the bridge beneath our feet, the locks on our doors, and the coordinates on our maps. But sometimes, those lines, they blur. We find ourselves in spaces where the logic of the world simply does not apply. Tonight, we're looking at 3 cases of people and even creatures who stepped into the wrong place at the absolute worst time. These aren't just mysteries. These are shattered realities. The kind of stories that make you look twice at your own reflection and wonder if the life you've built is as permanent as you believe. I'm Tamsin Lee, and these are 3 cases of people who stepped into the wrong reality. To look at Overtoun Bridge is to look at a masterpiece of Victorian stone. It's granite, it's arched, and it sits 50 feet above a jagged, rocky gorge in West Dunbartonshire, Scotland. It looks like the kind of place you'd go for a peaceful Sunday walk. And that's exactly what Kenneth Brooke was doing back in 2005. Kenneth was walking his dog, Cassie, a happy, energetic golden retriever. She was a dog that knew her boundaries. She wasn't a jumper. As they stepped onto the bridge, the sun was out, the air was clear, and everything felt normal. But as they reached the final 2 parapets on the right-hand side, Cassie stopped. She didn't growl. She didn't whimper. According to Kenneth, she just looked up at something invisible in the air. Her tail stopped wagging. And then, without a single second of hesitation, Cassie, a dog who had never done anything like this in her life, leaped over the granite edge. Kenneth screamed her name,
Cassie!
Rushing to the side. He looked down 50 feet into the gorge, expecting the worst. Cassie survived the fall. She hit the rocks below. And miraculously, she stood up. But Kenneth noticed something chilling. Cassie wasn't looking for him. She wasn't trying to find a way back to her owner. She was staring back up at the bridge. She looked possessed. Now, here's the part that defies all animal instinct. Kenneth scrambled down the embankment to get to her, but by the time he reached the bottom, Cassie was already trying to climb back up the steep, jagged rocks. Not to get to the car, not to get to safety. She was trying to get back to the bridge, to jump again. Cassie is just one of over 600 dogs who have done this since the 1950s. And while Cassie survived, many others, over 50 of them, did not. But why? Why always from the same 2 parapets? And why only on clear, sunny days? When you have a mystery this consistent, you look for a rational, mechanical explanation. Scientists and animal behaviorists eventually flocked to Overtoun. They looked at the acoustics, They wondered if the bridge was vibrating at a frequency only dogs could hear, a sound so painful it drove them to escape the only way they could. They found nothing. Then they looked at the scent. Below the bridge, in the thick brush of the gorge, there are minks. Mink urine has a powerful, musky scent that can drive dogs into a hunting frenzy. The theory was that on clear days, the scent rises and the dogs are simply following their noses over the edge. But there's a problem with that theory. If it was just about the scent of a mink, dogs would be jumping off bridges all over Scotland. There are minks everywhere. But they aren't. They are only jumping here. And it doesn't explain why the dogs don't just bark or pull at the leash. It doesn't explain why they leap with a sense of intention. If the science fails, you have to look at the history. Long before the bridge was built, the locals in Dunbartonshire had a name for this land. They called it a thin place. In Celtic mythology, a thin place is a geographical coordinate where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the something else is worn down to a thread. It's a place where things can cross over. Some believe the dogs aren't jumping because they're hunting. They believe dogs, with their heightened senses, are seeing or hearing something at those last two parapets that we simply can't. They are walking into a hollow space in the world, responding to a calling that has been trapped in those stones for 100 years. It's as if they can see the grief that we've spent decades trying to ignore. Whether it's a biological fluke or a structural anomaly in reality, the fact remains. If you visit Overtoun Bridge, you'll see the signs. They warn you to keep your dogs on a lead. They warn you to be careful, because on Overtoun, you aren't just crossing a bridge. You're walking a tightrope over a mystery that has no bottom. And once that calling starts, even the most loyal companion might decide that their place isn't by your side, but in the air.
Analyzing dense court ledgers at 2 a.m. requires absolute mental clarity. I used to rely on mainstream energy drinks, but I hated the sugar crashes and the fact that they are packed with cheap fillers and artificial dyes, like Red 40. That's why I switched to Dubby Energy. What I respect about Dubby is their story. Their founder actually launched the brand out of his apartment to take on big energy, because he knew creators deserved something cleaner. Dubby uses an all-natural coffee fruit extract and essential B vitamins for focus. With 0 sugar, 0 calories, and 0 artificial dyes, it's just smooth, jitter-free energy that lets me edit for hours. They are massive supporters of independent true crime channels, like this one. Keep your mind sharp and support our late-night research by hitting the link in the description and using code TAMSANLEE for 10% off your order.
It was a humid morning in July 1954 at Haneda Airport. Thousands of people were moving through customs, but one man caught the attention of the officers. He was middle-aged, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, and spoke fluent French, though he knew enough Japanese to get by. He looked like any other executive traveling for business. But When he reached the front of the line and handed over his passport, the officer froze. The passport looked real. The leather was high quality. The stamps from previous trips to Europe and Japan were legitimate, and the ink was perfect. But the country listed on the cover was Taured. The officer looked up at the man and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but where is this country located?" The man didn't laugh. He didn't look nervous. He looked annoyed. He replied, "It's in Europe, between France and Spain. It has been there for 1,000 years." The officer checked his list of recognized nations. Nothing. He called over his supervisor. Still nothing. This wasn't a typo. This wasn't just a fake ID or a clever lie. This was a direct challenge to everything we know to be true. To this man, the maps we use weren't just wrong. They were a betrayal of the only home he had ever known. The man was taken to a small, windowless interrogation room. He sat there for hours, growing more frustrated by the second. He showed them his driver's license. It was issued by Taured. He showed them his checkbook from a Taured bank. He even had several different types of European currency in his wallet. Everything about this man's life was documented, official, and, to him, completely mundane. Finally, the officers brought in a large world map and spread it out across the table. They pointed to the area between France and Spain, specifically to the tiny country of Andorra. They asked, "Is this it? Is this your country?" The man turned pale. He stood up and pointed exactly where Andorra was and said, "That is Taured. I don't know what an Andorra is, but that is where I live. That is where I've always lived." At this point, the Japanese authorities were convinced they were dealing with a mastermind, a spy or a fraud, with documents so perfect they had to be the work of a government. They decided they needed a night to figure out who he really was. They didn't take him to a jail cell. Instead, they took him to a nearby high-end hotel. They put him in a room on the 15th floor. No balcony, just a large, thick glass window that did not open. They placed 2 armed guards directly outside his door. They took his passport and his documents and locked them in a security office at the airport for safekeeping. They were going to wake him up in the morning and get the truth. Inside that room, the man was heard pacing for a few minutes. Then the lights went out. The guards outside didn't hear a sound for the rest of the night. No door opening, no shouting, nothing. The 15th floor is high enough that jumping would be fatal. And even if he tried, the window was made of reinforced glass that had not been tampered with. To the guards, he was trapped in a box. The next morning, the sun came up over Tokyo. The guards knocked on the door. No answer. They used the master key to enter the room, expecting to find the man sleeping, or perhaps hiding in the bathroom. The room was empty. The bed was made, the man's luggage gone. They tore the room apart. They checked the vents, the closet, the tiny space under the bed. There was no one. But then the real panic set in. They called the airport security office to check the evidence they had seized: the passport, the checkbook, the currency. They opened the safe, and that was empty too. Everything associated with the man from Taured had effectively evaporated into thin air. For 70 years, researchers have looked for a trace of this man. They've looked for the passport, the records, anything. But there is nothing. It's as if the universe realized he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and simply edited him out of our timeline. He wasn't a criminal. He was just a man who belonged to a history that wasn't ours, a traveler who stepped out of his own life and into a world where everything he knew to be true simply did not exist. In June of 1947, the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, was unusually calm. Two American vessels, the Silver Star and the City of Reading, were cutting through the heavy, humid air when their radio operators suddenly sat upright. A frantic Morse code signal was cutting through the static. It was coming from a Dutch freighter called the SS Ourang Medan. The first part of the message was a chaotic jumble of dots and dashes, but then it cleared up into a series of sentences that would haunt those radio operators for the rest of their lives. It said, "All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead." There was a long, terrifying silence, and then one final, solitary transmission: "I die." The Silver Star immediately changed course. They spent hours scanning the horizon until finally they saw it. The Ourang Medan was drifting aimlessly, its engines silent, smoke nowhere to be seen. It looked like a ghost, just floating in the dead water. When the crew of the Silver Star pulled alongside, they shouted across the water. They blew their whistles. They waited for any sign of life. A face in a porthole, a hand on the railing. Nothing. The captain of the Silver Star put together a small boarding party. As these men climbed the side of the freighter and stepped onto the deck, they were hit by something they could not explain. Even though the tropical sun was beating down, the air on the deck of the Ourang Medan felt freezing cold. It felt heavy, like the atmosphere was physically pushing against them. And then they saw the first body. It was a crewman lying on his back on the deck. But this wasn't a man who had died in his sleep or from a sudden illness. His eyes were wide open, staring directly into the sun. His teeth were bared, and his arms were locked in a rigid, reaching position, as if he had been trying to fend off an invisible attacker in his final seconds. The rescuers moved deeper into the ship, and the scene only got worse. In the chart room, they found the officers. On the bridge, they found the captain. Every single one of them was in the same state. No blood, no wounds, no signs of a struggle. Just that same expression of absolute bone-chilling terror on every single face. Even the ship's dog, a small terrier, was found dead. Its jaw was locked in a silent snarl at something no one could see. The boarding party made their way down to the radio room. There, they found the man who had sent the final message. His hand was still resting on the Morse code key. His eyes were open, staring at the wall. He looked like he had seen something so horrific that his heart simply decided to stop rather than endure another second of it. The rescuers stood there in the silence, surrounded by a crew that seemed to have been turned to stone by fear. There was no mechanical failure they could see, no gas leak they could smell, just a hollow silence that felt like it was swallowing the ship whole. The captain of the Silver Star decided they couldn't leave the ship there. They prepared to tow the Ourang Medan back to port. But as they were securing the lines, a thick, oily smoke began pouring out of the number 4 cargo hold. The fire spread with an unnatural speed. The boarding party barely had time to scramble back to their own ship before the Ourang Medan was engulfed. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped through the hull, an explosion so violent it lifted the entire freighter out of the water. Within minutes, the ship began to sink. The rescuers watched from the deck of the Silver Star as the Ourang Medan slid beneath the waves, taking its crew, its logbooks, and its secrets down into the dark. Some people will tell you it was a cargo of poorly stored chemicals that leaked and poisoned the air. Others believe the crew encountered something out there in the deep that they weren't meant to see. But for the men who stood on that deck, the answer didn't matter. They knew they had stepped into a shattered reality, a place where the safety of the sea had been replaced by a mystery that refused to be solved. The Ourang Medan didn't just sink. It proved that sometimes the most terrifying thing about the ocean isn't what's lurking in the water. It's what might be waiting for us on the deck.
If you're ready to keep digging into the cases that keep us up at night, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started on the anomalies, the cold cases, and the stories that shatter our understanding of reality. And if you're pulling an all-nighter to dive into the research with me, you're going to need to stay sharp. I rely on Dubby Energy to keep me focused through every deep dive without the crash. It's the perfect fuel for when you need to be at your best. You can grab your own supply for 10% off by using my code TAMSANLEE at checkout. The link is waiting for you in the description below. Thank you for watching and for being part of this investigation.